Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor Jon V. Kofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a session on Syria and imperialist clashes over Syria, both at the regional and international level. When President Assad of Syria left, deposed, went to Moscow, and a new regime took over. Previously, a rebel group, previously linked to Al-Qaeda, but supported by Qatar, Turkey, and indirectly Saudi Arabia, the United States, as well as Israel, and headed by a man whose nom de guerre, the rebel name he gave himself, Jolani, who is now the head of the interim government. There was euphoria, especially in the Western world, cautiousness in many countries throughout the global South. Obviously, a sense of loss on the part of Iran and Russia because they were the major influencing powers in Syria before the Assad regime collapsed. The fact is that Syria was and remains the object of imperialist clashes. It has been that, and it remains as much. It is utterly unrealistic to claim that the regional players right now, Turkey, which is aiming at a sphere of influence in the Northeast, where there's a large concentration of Kurdish population up there, and Israel in the south, just north of the Golan Heights, which it annexed, of course, it carved out for itself, and it has been has claimed that as its own since the 1967 war. These two countries at the regional level are vying for preeminent influence in Syria. They are not interested in the welfare of the Syrian people. They are not, contrary to what they claim, by the way, they are not interested in the sovereignty of Syria. Again, contrary to what they claim, they are not interested in freedom and democracy because there is no such thing in Syria. There wasn't before with the authoritarian regime of Bashar al-Assad, and there's not going to be now. There isn't actually. If anything, indications are, given the policy that has been announced in the domain of the the domain of the field of education, that the new Syrian regime is moving toward an Islamist route, imposing that sort of regime. However, there is another indication which is very clear, and that is that the government figures that Jolani has chosen to be in his interim government are all from his own group. Okay. The group known as HTS Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They're all from his own group. They do not represent any other group. And Syria is a multidimensional country with Christians, Druze, Kurds, Shias, Sunnis, and so forth, so and minor tribes. So what we have here is a regime which, by all indications so far, a month later, seems that it is not going to be much different. One hopes for the best, but it's not going to be much different. Again, it is encouraging that they let out political prisoners at the very least, and that they met with some opposition, some minority leaders, I should say opposition, some minority leaders, but clashes are continuing. Israel is continuing its incursion in the south. Turkey is continuing fighting in the northeast, targeting the Kurds. So this country is the object of imperialist clashes right now. Turkey and Israel are the main regional imperialists vying for a slice of Syria. And at the global level, the United States behind Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Now, do we have any evidence for this? Absolutely. Today is January 10th. On January 9th, Israeli press revealed that Israel has been floating a plan to carve up Syria into spheres of influence, and of course, to take a chunk for itself. The idea that Israel is doing this for the reasons it has stated is not credible by anyone's measure, including the interim governments, the Julani government in Baghdad. The idea is they're only interested in protecting the minority rights, especially the Druze in the south and the Kurds in the north. And they're only interested in doing this because they see that Turkey is a menacing power trying to impose its hegemony over Syria, and that they really don't trust the Syrian government that much anyway. So they're only doing this, they're only in a quest of what many Zionists have embraced, an ideology borrowed from the Germans, which was born at the same time as Zionism, the ideology of Lebensraum, that is living space, greater Israel, expand, take territory at the expense of the Arabs. This plan was revealed yesterday by, that is January 9th, 2025, by the Israeli press. They argued that Israel is doing this, it's only doing this to protect the minorities of Syria. The irony of all this is that Israel has been found to be violating for decades, since 1948, the rights of its own minority, the Palestinians, and for more than a year, the state of Israel has been engaged in a war, in a genocidal war in Gaza, which, according to a report from England just yesterday, the fatalities are not 46,000, but more than likely twice that number, by the way, and more than likely 60 to 65% women and children. This is the reason that the International Criminal Court ruled that this is genocide. This is the reason that there have been warrants for the arrest of top leaders in Tel Aviv. Now, it just so happened that on the same day that the Israeli media made this announcement about its plans in Syria and its alleged concern for Syrian minorities, the US House of Representatives, by a vote of 243 to 140, voted to sanction the International Criminal Court. And I'm quoting, and any foreigner who investigates, arrests, detains, or prosecutes US citizens or allied country of Israel over this issue of warrants for war crimes. In other words, what we have here, and this is very important, what we have here is that the United States, as the patron state of Israel, among others in the Western world, by the way, is shielding Israel on the exact same date, January 9th, 2025, that Israel is floating the idea, and this is public, broadcast by the Israeli media, of carving up Syria. So the blatant hypocrisy, both on the part of Israel, which has been engaged in a genocide war in Gaza, according to the ICC, and then the US shielding Israel by having the US Congress pass by a vote of 243 to 140 a measure against anyone, sanctioning anyone who goes after anyone, a US citizen or an Israeli, connected to war crimes. Okay, this signals that what we have here is that the West, the country in the Western world, the United States, presenting itself as the defender of law and order, the country presenting itself as the one that wants to convince the rest of the world that it is the sentinel of the rule of law, when in fact it is violating and obstructing the rule of law and shielding its client state, Israel, from observing international law, not just according to the International Court, by the way, but also the United Nations, international human rights organizations, which have reached the exact same conclusions as the International Court. Now, here is where why we have a curious situation at the regional level, and both Turkey and Israel acting in a way that is like rogue states, let's say, in a way that is reminiscent of 19th century imperialism, when the Europeans, and after 1898, the United States, and then Japan after the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, 1905, these countries acted as though the rest of the world, the global South, were its backyard and they had a right to it. The United States, it's no secret, has an incoming president, Donald Trump, who was previously elected president in 2016. He was just elected again in 2020. and 24. Donald Trump floated a number of ideas which would be a blatant violation of international law. And this is one of the reasons why we can't expect Israel, the client state of the United States, or Turkey, a NATO member and a country that receives massive military aid from the United States, and the US has military bases in Turkey. We can't expect them to behave in observance of international law when the US itself, incoming president, floats the following ideas, just recently reminiscent of the wild, wild imperialist West of the 19th century and early 20th century. First, taking Panama Canal, and Trump arguing it's ours, we have a right to it, we maintain it, and so forth. I want to remind everyone that Panama did not exist before the Spanish-American War. It was as a separate country, that is. Of course, it existed, but not as a separate country. It was a province of Colombia. The U.S. took it, and the U.S. constructed the canal, and it has been a semi-colony of the United States ever since then. There was a lease that the U.S. imposed on the government it created in Panama under Theodore Roosevelt, and it was a 100-year lease. Okay, and Jimmy Carter, 1977, agreed to honor the lease. Okay, today we have an incoming president who says, well, it's ours, belongs to us. Why should the Chinese have it? Which in fact is completely false, because the government of Panama manages the canal, not China. China has nothing to do with this. Those who follow Chinese foreign policy in Latin America know that China, about a month ago or so, signed a massive deal with the government of Peru to construct a canal in Peru. To construct a port, sorry, not a canal, to construct a port in Peru, and to use that port as its base of operation. Okay. Now, China has nothing to do with the Panama Canal. It pays tolls and so forth, like everybody else, shipping tolls to go through the canal, and that's it. The other issue that the United States, to give you an idea of the destabilizing impact that it has and how this impacts Syria and how it emboldens countries like Turkey under the neo-Ottoman President Erdogan, who follows the policy of reviving the old Ottoman Empire and expanding into Syria, and then Israel with its Lebensraum ideology of creating a greater Israel at the expense of its neighbors. Trump argued that he wants Greenland. Not a new idea. Back in 2019, he had floated this idea again. Why? To put their military bases, because obviously we wanted to secure the Western world, the peace and security of the Western world. In fact, it was just recently revealed that the United States under Biden had blocked efforts of China to secure a deal with a local company in Greenland to exploit the rare earth minerals, which are used. There are about 50 or 60, I forget how many, but somewhere in there. There are rare earth minerals. Greenland has some of those, which are vital to high-tech batteries especially, but also the defense sector and some application in medical science. So you have like lithium, for example. So you have a situation where the US is interested in Greenland, not just for geopolitical reasons, but geoeconomic. And the canal, the retaking of the canal, of course, would be to use it as leverage against Chinese shipping, because everybody knows the COSCO China company, shipping company, is the largest in the world. China has, by volume and by value, the largest shipping interest in the world. It's not a secret. So the US figures, let's take it, let's use it as leverage. Okay. Greenland, violation of the sovereign rights of Denmark, because it's been under the sovereignty of Denmark, but also a a blatant statement that even the BBC, which is as pro-US, as pro-Western as you can get, came very close to concluding, well, this sounds like imperialism of the 19th century. Even the BBC, let alone how the European more centrists and leftists, and even, by the way, mainstream governments in Europe argue, well, this is absurd. He's coming after Denmark uh, to take Greenland. Now, China, it is true that China went in, Chinese company, not China, Chinese company went in to negotiate a deal for rare earth elements in Greenland. But China did not say, we want to take over Greenland. They wanted rare earth minerals. The US did not go into this company and say, by the way, we consider our deal, consider our offer on the table. We're here to negotiate a deal. They just blocked. This is under Biden. At least Trump is honest enough to say, we're just imperialists and we'll use military force to do it, to take it. Biden did it behind the scenes and blocked China, and then offered, the company told them, we are cash strapped, we need the money to continue operations. And they offered a fraction of what the Chinese company was offering, by the way. Okay? To give you an idea of the sort of behavior in international affairs that emboldens aggressive countries like Israel, openly militarist countries like Israel, as well as Turkey, and under Erdogan with its neo-Ottoman goals of securing a chunk of Syria for geopolitical goals to counteract Israel and Iran, because those are the three powers. Regionally, Iran, Israel, and Turkey are the major ones. Saudi Arabia in the Gulf, okay, also competing with Iran in the Gulf as well. And that is a consideration. And they also supported the ousting of Assad, and they had been against him since the civil war of 2011. We'll talk more about that. But this is the situation, to the degree that the United States incoming president has even floated the idea of annexing Canada and reducing it to the 51st state, is an indication that the so-called US rule of law that it wants to present to the world, here we're in favor of the rule of law. By the way, we'll take Canada. You know, the odd thing about all of this is that there is a war in Ukraine. Russia went to war in Ukraine to stop Ukraine from becoming a NATO member and stop NATO from expanding eastward. And the US and its allies in the West, NATO, reduced Ukraine to a proxy war state and tried to prevent Russia from using its military using military force and military solution to stop NATO expansion eastward and to stop Ukraine from being reduced into a NATO satellite. Yet, the incoming president has floated ideas about taking Canada. And we'll see about Mexico. And by the way, while we're at it, why don't we rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? In other words, what we have here is blatant imperialism. Now, here's where I would agree with some of the cynical critics, especially in Europe, who argue, well, what is so different about Trump claiming all of this? When in fact, the policy of the US under a democratic facade has been exactly what Trump is suggesting. It's just that they don't do it in that fashion. And they certainly, by the way, do not suggest reducing Canada to the 51st state or sending troops to Mexico and so forth. As far as the name, even Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader, the Democratic leader, said, well, we'll negotiate. We'll be willing to go along with that if you do something to raise living standards for the middle class and the working class. So this gives you an idea that this is indeed bipartisan. This is not just a cult of personality and the antics of this man that is the bravado of Trump, the bluster of Trump. This is policy of the United States, and it's bipartisan. They disagree in style, but in substance, they agree. Now, I mentioned all of this, and I'm sorry for taking up so much time to mention all of this. It's because it's against this background, combined with the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, that two countries regionally, Turkey and Israel, are competing for preeminent influence in Syria. And what in Israel, in the name of protecting minorities, when it has been exploiting, repressing, and killing its own minority population, the Palestinians, for decades. And right now, the International Court, like I said, public record, sorry, the United Nations, public record, go to the UN archives, you can look at it for yourself. International human rights organizations, this is all a matter of public record. So what we have is hypocrisy, vacuous rhetoric, and nothing more. And continuing to argue while all of this aggressive imperialist scheming is taking place. By the way, we support democracy and the rights of minorities. Okay. Now, let me move on to the situation then in Turkey and the Kurds, because I want to focus more on that the rest of the time that I have. There are an estimated 30 to 45 million Kurds, in most of them, by the way, in Turkey. In Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, some in Armenia, some down in Lebanon. But the Turkish population is 87 million. It's estimated between 20-22% of them are the Kurdish minority concentrated in the northeast. The policy of Turkey toward the Kurdish minority began to take a harsh tone in the 1980s, coinciding with the advent of the neoliberal political economy model that Turkey began to adopt, which is based on class warfare, strengthening the private sector in the case of Turkey under authoritarian policies, and Erdogan is an authoritarian leader, by the way, very pragmatic, very effective in what he has done, and pursuing the dream of the Neo-Ottoman Empire by making Turkey the little China of the Eastern Mediterranean, of the Near East. But nevertheless, this is at the expense of the working class of Turkey and of the minorities, and using the minority issue, by the way, using the Kurdish issue to deflect attention from class warfare that is embedded in the neoliberal model, and he has fully embraced, by the way, and also using it to embolden the nationalists under the Justice and Development Party that he is a member of. Okay. Now, the issue of the Kurdish struggle for autonomy, independence, more rights, and so forth is not new. The fact is that the Kurdish struggle, whether in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, and especially in Turkey, is rather old, and it became a major issue in the 1980s as things deteriorated, and in the 1990s when an estimated 40,000 Kurds were killed, by the way, and the justification was that, well, there are Kurdish organizations, and by the way, there are something like 3 dozen Kurdish organizations in Turkey, and the Turkish government, including Erdogan, has tried to keep them divided against each other. The most important, by the way, is the Kurdish Workers' Party. The PKK are the acronyms for that, which Abdallah Öcalan founded, and he is currently in prison. The Kurdish population, I should tell you, has been a thorn on the side of Erdogan, and its affiliated organizations in Syria have been a thorn because they want more autonomy. But it's not just that. If you look at statistics on living standards of the Kurdish population, what you see is that it's far below that of the average in Turkey. Every metric you look at, whether it's health, education, infrastructure, housing, income level, they are far below. Unemployment, I forgot to mention unemployment. So you have all the metrics, socioeconomic metrics you have. When you look at them, you can see why this population is up in arms and has been for decades. No population, no minority population anywhere in the world, whether it's in the United States, the African Americans, or whether it's in Israel, the Palestinians, or many of the Muslims in India under Modi's Hindu nationalist party, by the way, which he has used to promote neoliberalism, and has used the Muslim minority as a pretext, marginalizing them. No minority population is going to be objecting to this degree that they are objecting. The Kurds are objecting, for example, among others, of course, around the world. If everything is fine, if they are taken care of, if their socioeconomic needs are taken care of, and they have freedom of speech, they're not going to be doing this sort of thing. That means there is repression, systematic repression, and there has been, as I mentioned, thousands killed over the decades, especially in the 90s. Okay, There have been journalists targeted, by the way, by the Turkish government. Not a secret. There is an international organization of reporters without borders, or some I think it's that group, um, which which ranks Turkey very low globally of all the countries in the world in um, uh, in supporting media freedom, supporting freedom of the press, which is a fundamental right. Okay, what has happened during the Erdogan regime is that there has been media consolidation, again, another neoliberal scheme, which you see also in Western countries, but also in other countries around the world, and a pro Erdogan media group, by the way, has gobbled up much of the media outlets in Turkey. So there has been a marginalization of the voices of the minorities and the working class in Turkey. So the way I view this issue, this clash between the Turks and the Kurds, and this extends into Syria because there's a Kurdish population there, and some of them are affiliated with groups like PKK in Turkey that support the larger cause of Kurdish human rights and Kurdish autonomy as an ultimate goal. Now, the government of Turkey has announced since the fall of Assad that it has become more aggressive, and it has made no secret that it's going after the Kurdish organizations, especially PKK elements and affiliated elements uh, in Syria. So for the Turkish government, it isn't enough that it marginalizes and represses and it keeps suppressed its own Kurdish minority population in the northeast, which, by the way, the Israelis claim that they are friends of and want to defend their rights. Never mind the rights of the Palestinians, like a reminder here of their own minority population. They're interested all of a sudden in the Kurds. Um, so they argue that we're not going to have any peace unless we secure a chunk of a strategic safety zone, national security zone of influence, as in the 19th century. These are 19th century imperialist schemes, by the way. Okay? Secure that zone, and we're doing it in the name of national security because we have these terrorists, PKK, terrorist organization according to Turkey. The terrorists, according to Turkey, are the Kurds, not the jihadists that Turkey supported during the civil war in Syria, which were ISIS until Russia and Iran intervened, and then they backed off. They sided with Russia and Iran. And Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra is the other group, Al-Qaeda, which is Al-Qaeda affiliated, by the way. And of course, Jolani's group, HTS, which is now the government. Okay. Just for the record, the Kurds fought against these jihadist groups. One of the reasons that the United States supported some of these Kurdish groups is because they were, in fact, counterbalancing Turkey, and they were, in fact, fighting against the jihadist groups, which indirectly the US had supported because Saudi Arabia was and Qatar were also behind them, by the way. Now, need to point out that the uh, Turkish situation with the Kurds is a pretext for Turkey to secure preeminent geopolitical and geoeconomic influence. Two things on economic influence. Turkey historically has had a major commercial role in Syria. Many of its companies were there, even doing business, by the way. Even before Assad fell, Turkey was trying to negotiate and hoping he would come to, Assad would go to Ankara to negotiate a pipeline, a gas and oil pipeline coming, an energy pipeline coming, pipelines, I should say, plural, coming from Qatar up to through Syria. And because Turkey's ultimate goal, I pointed this out in previous videos on Turkey, is to become the major energy distributor in the Eastern Mediterranean with pipelines of gas and oil going through it and becoming a distributor in the Balkans and Western Europe. So Turkey is dreaming big. It has big ambitions. And a rival to Turkey is not just Iran and Russia, but a rival to Turkey is actually Israel, which is also interested in the same geoeconomic role as Turkey, and that is becoming an energy distributor. This is why it has aligned itself with Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece to exploit the natural gas and oil in the Aegean Sea, okay, and rival what Turkey is trying to do. So that's the geoeconomic goal and geoeconomic competition, and this is where Syria plays a role. Nobody's interested in Syria's working class and the middle class. Nobody's interested in Syria's sovereignty, national sovereignty, or its minorities. They're interested in exploiting Syria for its location geoeconomically and the natural resources going through it, energy resources. The other interesting aspect of Turkey is that it knows that Syria will need 300 to 600 billion, probably more, for war reconstruction. Syria was in a civil war. It's going to need a lot of reconstruction. Turkish construction companies have lined up behind this regime so they can secure the contracts for the reconstruction of Syria. Okay, so that's the geoeconomic dimension of this. The geopolitical, it wants to make sure that it has leverage, marginalizes, suppresses the Kurds up in the northeast, okay, by securing a zone of influence up there, a remnant of a concept that's a remnant of the 19th century imperialist schemes, okay. However, it finds opposition not necessarily from Iran. Maybe I should mention something here about Iran. After Assad fell, Turkey moved swiftly to raise the tolls that it charges, not on all vehicles coming from Iran through Turkey, just on vehicles carrying gas and oil, making it so expensive that it's not worth it for the truckers to do it, because they spend more paying the tolls to Turkey than they make for themselves, twice or sometimes 2.5, 3 times more for the toll than the profit that they would make. And there are hundreds of trucks lined up along the border cities there from Iran to Turkey. The Turkey has done this to further isolate Iran. Now that Iran, by the way, by its own admission, some of its officials have admitted that yes, we're the losers in the Syria situation, the fall of Assad, and the rise of HTS and Jolani. And Turkey and Israel are the winners. They're the new regional players. So Turkey saw this opportunity. The only reason that Turkey did this, they said, because Iran recently has imposed some high tariffs of their own on contraband oil. By the way, in the Balkan region and in the Near East, there is a lot of contraband. And oil, cigarettes is another, but oil and natural gas is one of those areas. There was a lot of that undermining the domestic producers in Iran. And Iran decided to crack down. And some of the distributors were Turkish. And Turkey used that to retaliate against Iran. Okay. Not that Iran, by the way, has any interest in promoting Kurdish interests, because they have Kurds of their own. They have a Kurdish minority of their own. They don't want problems with the Kurdish minority. They haven't given them much leeway. They've been somewhat better with them. They don't have the 22% of the total population that Turkey has, but they have a Kurdish minority, but they're not interested in promoting their interests. They're interested in promoting broader economic interests of the country. At the same time that Turkey did this, by the way, just again, this is very important because it all ties in. I'm sorry, it makes it more complicated. But Azerbaijan decided to block the flow of trucks going through there because Iran could have used Azerbaijan and bypass Turkey and go north through the Transcaucasus region and reach Europe that way. But Azerbaijan blocked them. So what you have here is a concerted regional effort for hegemony. Iran is clearly one of the hegemonic powers, no matter how you slice it. It's not going to, just because of these developments, by the way, it's not going anywhere. It's not going away. And Iran, it's no secret, is on its way to develop nuclear weapons. It has the know-how. It can develop nuclear weapons. As the great father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, pointed out, nuclear weapon knowledge is not in the laboratory. It's up here in the head of the nuclear engineers. So Iran is doing that. And Turkey is now also interested in developing nuclear technology, nuclear weapons, to develop nuclear warheads, to become one of the nuclear powers, because Israel has an estimated 60 nuclear warheads, and Iran can develop them. It's negotiating at this point. It's leveraging that to get some economic gains, namely dropping sanctions, having the West drop sanctions. That's not going very far, so we'll see what happens. But this is part of the more complicated picture here. And here comes Israel saying, by the way, we're only interested in protecting the minority rights of the Kurds up there in the north that Turkey is repressing, and and then in the south, the Druze population. And adding to this, by the way, all of a sudden you see in Israeli press that Turkey is even a greater threat to Israel than Iran, of course, which is, you never know who is a greater threat to Israel. All of their neighbors are a greater threat to them. But the fact is, they did invade Lebanon. They have invaded Lebanon repeatedly. They have bombed Iraq. They have bombed Syria. They want a deal on spheres of influence in Syria. And the suspicion is, from what I have read, that the U.S. is fully aware. It is impossible that the U.S. embassy and CIA agents on the ground in Israel are clueless about what Israel has been doing. We found out because the press released this information. The CIA knew. The US knew exactly what the schemes were. Now, the US is on record, at least publicly. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes because they need Turkey as a NATO member, and they need Turkey because of its location. But and they have said publicly that they're opposed to Turkey carving up Syria up in the north and using the Kurdish issue. And the US has placed itself, like Israel, as a friend of the Kurdish people. Right. Never mind that the US has a long standing record on its own minority population. Never mind that. It's all of a sudden it's interested in the welfare and the rights and the human rights and the civil rights and the economic rights of the Kurdish minority. So we don't know what the US reaction is going to be to the Israeli scheme, which we found out yesterday. The Israelis are floating this idea for an international conference. Supposedly, they want the Saudis and the Qataris in on this. They want, even unofficially. By the way, just again, another aside to give you an idea of how much influence Qatar and Saudi Arabia have, as well as the United States. Just yesterday, January 9th, another development. A US trained military official became the new president of Lebanon with the blessing of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Okay. So it is not so out of the question that Syria could be reduced into a very weak satellite of the conservative Gulf states, okay, having cordial relations with Israel, although the Jolani has made it very clear he wants their troops out in the south, okay. It is not out of the question that it's going to be solidly pro-US, especially considering, again, a development of the last couple of days, that the Syrian government has blocked Russian cargo ships coming to dismantle some of the air bases, some of the bases, naval bases, and take some of the equipment back to Russia. Okay. One has to suspect this is with the consultation of the United States that they've been doing this. So Syria, under Jolani, under the HTS regime, is just as big of a satellite, more complex, more complicated, more players now. Before, in the last at least 7 years or so, it was really Russia and Iran that were the major players. They encouraged, by the way, President Assad to ameliorate relations with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. He did what he did, and to improve relations with the minorities. Again, he did what he did. He was a dictator. He was an authoritarian figure. Now, the situation is more complex. At the regional level, it's Israel and Turkey, and they are at each other. The rhetoric is as militaristic as you can get, very aggressive against each other, of course. Turkey arguing Israel is committing genocide. How dare they repress the Palestinian rights? But Turkey has a minority population, the Kurdish population, that it hardly has a stellar record toward that population. Moreover, Turkey has not done in practice anything to help the Palestinian people. The rhetoric, yes, it's great, but it hasn't done anything in practice. It has continued trade relations with Israel. So hypocrisy is abundant here. Hypocrisy is abundant. And Syria will sink toward the level of a weak state, subject to influences from the Gulf states, from Israel, from Turkey, from the United States. That's unfortunately where I see its future. What does this mean for the population of Syria? It's not good news. I mentioned in a previous video that I did on the fall of Assad that we have 70, according to the United Nations statistics, 70 to 80% of the population of Syria below the poverty line. Below. There has been a lot of rhetoric at the United Nations on the part of the representatives of the West, especially the United States, to do something about humanitarian aid. There has been enormous talk on the part of the HTS government, Julani's government, to have the West lift the sanctions. The U.S. has not done that, by the way. The U.S. has not lifted the sanctions because it's using them as leverage to continue to have influence in Syria. The only thing he has done, it has eased up on humanitarian aid. Because, like I said, according to the United Nations, 70 to 80% of the population is below the poverty line. I thank you for listening. I ask you to write questions, to write comments, and to, by all means, subscribe to this channel. This is an educational channel. My very good friend Asad Alim manages this channel, interested in promoting education and analysis free of vacuous rhetoric, polemics, and propaganda, analysis based on empirical developments. Thank you very much.